Hi everyone, my name is Madison Clark. I'm 34 years old and I live in a small house in Columbus, Ohio that I bought myself, with money I earned myself, after years of being told by my own family that I would never amount to anything. I want you to sit with that for a second, because the people who told me that, the people who called me lazy, ungrateful, a burden, a freeloader, they were not strangers. They were not bullies from school. They were my own blood. And the person who led that chorus, who seemed to take genuine joy in making me feel worthless every single holiday and family dinner for the better part of 2 decades, that was my brother, Derek. And I want to tell you what happened the day our father's will was read. Because if you have ever been the one in your family who everyone underestimated, if you have ever sat at a table where someone you love talked over you, dismissed you, or made you feel invisible, then this story is going to hit you somewhere very deep. And, I promise you, by the end of it, you are going to feel exactly what I felt sitting in that lawyer's office when everything Derek had built over 30 years came apart in about 11 minutes. So let me take you back. Let me show you where this all started, because the ending only makes sense when you understand the beginning. I grew up in a house that, from the outside, looked completely fine. My parents, Frank and Carol Clark, were decent people in the way that most parents of their generation were decent. They worked hard. They paid their bills. They showed up to things. My dad was a civil engineer. Quiet man. Methodical. The kind of person who kept a notebook in his breast pocket and wrote things down instead of reacting right away. My mom was warmer, louder, and I'll be honest, she was always a little easier on Derek. Derek is 5 years older than me. He was the first grandchild on both sides of the family. He was tall, athletic, charming, the kind of person who always knew what to say and when to say it. Teachers liked him. Coaches liked him. Extended family adored him. I was the second child. I was quieter. I liked books. I spent weekends drawing and reading, which apparently made me mysterious in a way that made people uncomfortable. Where Derek filled rooms, I sort of watched them, and in my family, watching was not considered a virtue. Growing up, I didn't think too much about the dynamic. I knew Derek got more attention, more praise, more latitude, but I told myself it was just the firstborn thing. That's normal, right? Firstborns get the spotlight. I made peace with it. What I didn't realize then was that Derek had been watching the dynamic too, and unlike me, he wasn't making peace with it. He was studying it. He was learning how to use it. The first real moment I can point to, the moment that, looking back, I should have taken more seriously, happened when I was about 15 years old. I had applied to a summer art program at Ohio State. It was competitive, and I got in. I was so proud. I told my parents at dinner, and my dad smiled his quiet smile and said he was proud of me. My mom said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie." And Derek said, without even looking up from his plate, "Art school." Great! So you've decided you want to be broke. And everybody laughed, including my mom. And that was the moment I understood. In this family, Derek set the tone. Derek decided what was impressive and what was embarrassing. And if Derek dismissed something, everyone else fell in line. I still went to that summer program. But I never forgot that dinner. Through high school, through college, through my early 20s, the pattern continued. Derek went into finance, made good money early, bought a beautiful house in a suburb of Cleveland, married a woman named Brenda who was fashionable and a little cold and absolutely worshipped him. They had 2 kids, went on 2 vacations a year, and made sure everyone in the family knew it. I, meanwhile, studied graphic design, struggled in my mid-20s the way most creative people do, moved around a bit, worked some jobs that didn't pay well, and eventually built something real and solid. But the struggling years, those became my identity in Derek's version of the family story. "Madison's still figuring it out," he'd say. "You know how Madison is," he'd tell relatives at Thanksgiving. "I just worry about her," he'd say to my parents with this face full of performed concern that I came to absolutely despise. And, what made it so insidious? What made it land so hard every single time? was that he said all of it with this veneer of caring, as if he was the devoted older brother, deeply concerned for his lost little sister, as if I was some project he tried to help and failed. It made me look like the problem. It made him look like the saint. If you've grown up with a sibling like this, you already know exactly what I'm describing. And you already know how exhausting it is to try to defend yourself against someone who's learned to frame every attack as an act of love. If you haven't experienced this, trust me when I say it is one of the most disorienting things a person can live through. Because the cruelty is never visible, it's buried inside concern, inside worry, inside family dinners where everyone smiles and nobody says the real thing. For a long time, I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. I worked. I built my life slowly and carefully, piece by piece. I got a good job at a mid-sized marketing firm. I worked my way up. I bought that little house in Columbus. I was genuinely happy with my life, not perfect, but mine. But every time I went home, I had to walk back into Derek's version of me, and that version was exhausting to wear. My father was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease when I was 28. He told us at a family dinner, just Mom, Derek, Brenda, and me. He was calm about it, the way he was calm about everything. He explained what the doctors had said. He explained what it meant for his day-to-day life in the short term. He said he wasn't looking for pity, just for us to be aware. Derek, sitting across from me, immediately went into problem-solving mode. He said he'd researched the best specialists in the state. He talked about second opinions and clinical trials and connections he had. He dominated the conversation for the next 30 minutes, while my father sat there quietly, and my mother wiped her eyes. I sat next to my dad and held his hand. I don't say that to make myself sound heroic. I say it because it was such a natural, automatic thing, and because I noticed afterward that nobody else had done it. Over the next several years, my father's condition progressed slowly but consistently. He stayed active longer than the doctors expected. He kept his mind sharp. He kept his notebooks. He kept writing things down instead of reacting right away, just like he always had. Derek, during this period, was visibly present at every major moment. He flew in for medical appointments, sometimes. He called my dad on Sundays, usually. He sent thoughtful gift baskets at the holidays, always with a handwritten card that somehow referenced something my dad had said 6 months ago, which I think he kept in his spreadsheet, knowing Derek. He was, by every visible metric, the attentive son. What he was not was there. Not in the day-to-day. Not in the way that actually matters when someone you love is getting sick. I started driving to my parents' house on weekends more often. At first, it was once a month, then every other weekend, then, when my dad had a fall in the backyard during a bad stretch of symptoms, I started going almost every weekend. My parents' house was about 2 hours from Columbus. I'd leave Friday after work, stay through Sunday, and drive back in time to be at my desk Monday morning. I fixed things around the house. I drove my dad to appointments when my mom couldn't. I sat with him in the afternoons when he was tired and didn't want to watch TV and just wanted someone to be there. We talked. We talked more during those years than we had my entire childhood. He asked me about my work, my life, my plans. He listened in a way he hadn't when I was younger, with full attention, without Derek in the room redirecting everything. I learned things about my dad during those years that I hadn't known. He had wanted to be a painter before he became an engineer. He had been in love with someone else before he met my mother, a woman named Helen who'd moved to Seattle and never come back. He had regrets about not being more present when Derek and I were small because he'd been so focused on providing that he'd confused providing with parenting. He told me, more than once, that he was proud of me, that he saw how hard I worked, that he admired my independence in a way he hadn't always known how to express. I treasured those conversations. I never repeated them to anyone. They were just ours. Derek knew I was going on weekends. He mentioned it occasionally. It's great that Madison can do that. She doesn't have kids yet. as if my caregiving was simply a product of my having fewer responsibilities rather than a deliberate, costly choice. He didn't offer to take weekends. He had, he said, a demanding job and two kids and a long drive from Cleveland. My mother, to her credit, never said Derek should be doing more. But she also never really acknowledged what I was doing. It was just the expected thing, I suppose. I was there, so I did it. That was the logic. And here is where I want to be honest. Because this story is about truth and not just victimhood. I was not always gracious about it. There were weekends I was resentful. There were drives back to Columbus where I cried. There were Sunday nights when I looked at my own apartment, my own unwashed dishes, my own unmade plans, and thought, when does someone take care of me? I was not a saint. I was just a daughter who loved her father. The hardest stretch was the last 8 months. My dad's condition declined sharply the year before he passed. He needed more help than my mom could give on her own. We looked into home care aides, found one who came 3 mornings a week. But the evenings and weekends still mostly fell to whoever was there, which was mostly me. I took 6 weeks of FMLA leave from work during a particularly bad stretch. I stayed at my parents' house for most of that time. I managed his medications. I helped him to the bathroom in the middle of the night when he couldn't manage alone. I watched Jeopardy with him every evening because he still loved it, still called out answers in a voice that was getting softer but never quite went quiet. Derek came twice during those 8 months. Once at Thanksgiving, once in March, about 6 weeks before my dad passed. Each time he arrived with expensive food and good energy and left after 3 days, kissed my mom on the cheek, shook my dad's hand, gently, because my dad's grip had gotten weak, and drove back to Cleveland. Each time he left, I stayed. My dad died on a Tuesday morning in April. I was there. My mom was there. Derek was not. He drove in that evening. I don't hold that against him. Death doesn't schedule itself around people's calendars. But here is what I do hold against him. At the reception after the funeral, in my mother's living room, surrounded by relatives and neighbors and people from my dad's church, Derek pulled me aside and said quietly, not unkindly, but with that edge he always had when he wanted to establish something. I'm going to need you to be realistic about the estate, Madison. Dad and I talked about things. I want you to be prepared. I looked at him. What does that mean? He smiled. That practiced, patient smile, and said, it just means the lawyer will explain everything. I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up about the house or anything major. Okay, I'm just looking out for you. And then he walked back into the living room and accepted condolences from people who called him such a devoted son. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. I didn't know what my father had left in his will. I hadn't asked. It had honestly never occurred to me to make that a priority. I was focused on the grief, on my mother, on getting through the week. But something in Derek's voice made my stomach drop. I thought about that conversation for the next 10 days, leading up to the will reading. And I want to ask you something, because I was genuinely unsure at the time. Do you think I was overreacting? Or do you think that conversation by the hallway was exactly what it sounded like? Drop it in the comments, because I still think about what I could have done differently in those 10 days. The will reading was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon, 10 days after the funeral. My father's lawyer was a man named Gerald Whitmore. He had an office in downtown Columbus, modest, organized, the kind of office that had diplomas on the wall and a dying plant in the corner that nobody had the heart to throw out. He had been my father's lawyer for 22 years. He knew our family. The night before the reading, Derek called me. Not to check in, not to see how I was doing. He called with a tone that was so careful, so deliberate, that I could feel him choosing every word. Hey, he said. So, before tomorrow, I just want to make sure you and I are on the same page about the house. What about the house? I asked. Well, pause. Dad and I discussed it. I mean, years ago and also more recently, and the plan was always that I would take over the house because of the kids, because of the family situation. Brenda and I have been thinking about moving closer to Mom anyway, so it makes sense for us to have the house. I sat with that. Derek, I don't know what the will says, neither do you. We find out tomorrow. Right, right, he said. I'm just saying, I mean, I want us to be mature about it. You don't need a house that big. You have your place in Columbus. And I know you haven't exactly been in a position to. I mean, you've had a lot of instability, Madison. Dad knew that. He would have wanted me to be the one managing things. There it was. You've had a lot of instability. He couldn't even get through a phone call about our father's will without reminding me of who he decided I was. We'll see what the will says, I said, and I got off the phone. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I drove to Gerald Whitmore's office. My mother was there when I arrived, sitting in the waiting room with her purse in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, the way she always sat when she was nervous. Derek arrived 11 minutes late, which he did on purpose, I'm now convinced, a small power move, arriving after everyone else so he could walk in and greet the room. Brenda was with him. She hadn't been invited. The reading was for direct heirs. But Derek had apparently decided that wasn't relevant. Gerald Whitmore, to his credit, said politely but firmly that the reading was for immediate family members named in the will and that Brenda was welcome to wait in reception. Derek's smile flickered. Just slightly. We went into the conference room. My mother sat on one side of the table. Derek sat at the end, like he was presiding over something. I sat next to my mother and held her hand. Gerald sat across from us and arranged his papers. Before I begin, Gerald said, I want to mention that Frank asked me to say something to all of you. He was very specific about this. He looked at us over his reading glasses. He said, please let Gerald finish before anyone speaks. All of it matters, not just the numbers. Derek laughed a little, that performative laugh he did when he was nervous but didn't want anyone to know. Very frank, he said. Gerald nodded. Very frank. And then he began. Now before I tell you what was in the will, I need you to understand what Derek was expecting. He had been, apparently, very thorough in his assumptions. I found this out afterward from my mother, who told me that in the weeks before the reading, Derek had told her his plan for the estate. His plan, and he presented it as though it were already decided, was this: he would take the house, manage the investments, and give my mother a monthly allowance from the estate that he would oversee. He had already, apparently, spoken to a real estate agent about the property value. He had also told my mother at some point during those weeks that I probably wouldn't be getting much because Madison always needed things to be simple and a lump sum would just confuse her. I want you to really sit with that. He told our grieving mother, weeks before a will reading, that I would be getting little, framing it as a kindness to me. I did not know this when I walked into that room. My mother told me afterward, trembling, apologizing for not telling me sooner. Okay. Back to the room. Gerald began with the standard language, the legal language. Then he moved into specifics. The estate included the family home, valued at approximately $480,000, a retirement and investment portfolio worth approximately $1.1 million, a life insurance policy of $200,000, personal property, a car, and several smaller accounts. Gerald looked up briefly, then back at his papers, and said, Frank Clark's estate is divided as follows. Derek straightened slightly in his chair. The family home in its entirety, including all property and contents therein, is left to Madison and Clark. The room went very still. I heard Derek inhale. Gerald continued without pausing. In addition, Madison Ann Clark is to receive 40% of the investment and retirement portfolio, the life insurance proceeds in full, and the personal vehicle. I felt my mother's hand tighten around mine. Derek said, Wait. Gerald held up one hand, a practiced calm gesture, and said, Frank asked that I finish before anyone speaks. Derek's jaw tightened. He sat back. Gerald continued. Derek James Clark is to receive 35% of the investment and retirement portfolio, the contents of the joint savings account, and the vacation property in Lake Erie, which Frank notes was purchased jointly with Derek in 2019 and which Derek has been using as a primary vacation asset. 25% to my mother in a separate trust for her care and living expenses. Derek sat very still for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that was quiet but had a current running under it, "There has to be a mistake." Gerald looked at him evenly. "There is no mistake, Derek. My father and I discussed this. We discussed the house specifically. He told me. I have documentation of when this will was drafted and revised," Gerald said. "The most recent revision was 14 months ago. I witnessed it. It is valid, legally sound, and final." 14 months ago! Derek's voice went a note higher. "He was all ready. He wasn't well." "He wasn't. Your father was of entirely sound mind 14 months ago," Gerald said. "He was sharp, specific, and knew exactly what he was doing. I can assure you of that." Derek turned to me, and I want to describe the look on his face carefully, because I want to be accurate and not dramatic. It was not rage. Not yet, it was confusion. Genuine confusion. The kind a person has when the world has failed to match the version they built inside their head. "Did you know about this?" he asked me. "No," I said honestly. "You had to have known." "Derek, I had no idea." "Then why would he—" He stopped, looked at Gerald. "Was there anything else? Any explanation? Any letter?" Gerald paused. "Yes," he said, "there was. My father had left a letter. Not a legal document, not an amendment. A personal letter, folded inside an envelope with all three of our names written on it in his handwriting, which by that point had gotten shaky but was still unmistakably his. Gerald passed it to my mother. She looked at it for a long moment. "Would you like me to read it?" Gerald asked. She nodded, because I don't think she could speak. Gerald unfolded the letter and put on his reading glasses. And then he read my father's words aloud. I am going to give you as much of it as I can remember, because I have gone over those words so many times in the months since that I think I could recite them in my sleep. My father wrote, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there to say these things myself. I've never been good at saying things out loud. I kept notebooks my whole life because paper was always easier than air. I love both of my children. I want that to be the first sentence because it is the truest sentence. But love does not mean equal, and fair does not always mean the same. Derek, I am proud of you. You have built a successful life, and you are a good father to your children. You have your mother's energy and your grandfather's ambition, and those are real gifts. The Lake Erie house is yours, and you know why. Because we built that together, and it belongs to you." The portfolio portion is significant, and it is a reflection of the trust I have in your financial acumen. But the family home is Madison's. Madison, you sat with me when I was scared. You drove 2 hours every weekend for years and never once asked to be thanked. You held my hand when your brother was giving speeches and I needed someone to just be there. You watched Jeopardy with me. You knew I still called out the answers even when my voice got quiet. You stayed. I know this family hasn't always seen you clearly. I know I was part of that when you were young, and I am sorry for it in a way I never found the right moment to say to your face. I'm saying it now. You are not what your brother said you were. You were never a freeloader. You were the one who showed up. The house is yours because home should belong to the person who made it feel like one. I love you both. Take care of your mother. And please, please, try to understand each other. You have the same blood and fewer years left than you think. Dad. Gerald folded the letter. The room was completely silent. My mother was crying quietly into her hand. I don't have a word for what I was. There is this feeling that lives between devastation and relief, between grief and gratitude, and I think that feeling doesn't have a name yet. That's what I was. Derek was staring at the table. After a long moment, he said, "He called me. He wrote that I gave speeches." Nobody answered. That's not fair. I was involved. I was present. I flew in. Derek, my mother said softly. He didn't see I had a family. I had responsibilities. Derek. Her voice was firmer. He went quiet. I looked at my brother then. And I want to be honest with you about this too. I felt sorry for him. In that moment, I genuinely did, because I could see that this was not just about the house or the money. This was about him discovering that the version of himself he had been performing for 30 years, the devoted son, the responsible one, the person who had everyone fooled, had not in the end fooled the one person whose opinion he had actually wanted. Our father had seen everything. He had just waited until the right moment to say it. The drive home from Gerald Whitmore's office was one of the strangest of my life. I sat in my car for 15 minutes before I could drive. I wasn't crying. I wasn't celebrating. I was just absorbing. Derek had left the conference room without saying goodbye. He'd shaken Gerald's hand stiffly, nodded at my mother, and walked past me without making eye contact. I heard his car leave the parking lot with more speed than necessary. My mother and I went back to our house, my house now, though that hadn't settled into reality yet, and we made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the one where we'd had 1,000 dinners, and she held a letter in her hands and read it again to herself. I didn't know, she said, about the revision. I didn't know he'd changed it. Did you know what Derek was expecting? I asked. She looked up at me, and I could see in her face that she was ashamed. He talked about it, she admitted. He made it sound like it was already decided. I thought maybe your father had told him something I wasn't aware of. And you never asked Dad directly. No. You know how your father was. He didn't like being questioned. And Derek was so confident about it. He had plans. He was already talking to a real estate agent about some renovations he wanted to do. I sat with that. Derek had been so confident, so certain, so thoroughly in control of the narrative that even our mother hadn't thought to question it. That night Derek texted me. He didn't call. He texted, which felt very cowardly, but also very Derek. The text said, I think we need to talk about this. I'm not okay with this outcome, and I think Dad wasn't in a good place when he made these decisions. I'm going to get a second opinion. I stared at that message for a long time. A second opinion, as if our father's clearly expressed, witnessed, legally valid wishes were a medical diagnosis he could shop around until someone told him what he wanted to hear. I didn't respond that night. The next few days were a flood of extended family opinions, which, if you've been through any kind of estate situation, you know can be even more exhausting than the estate itself. Derek had clearly been working the phones. Within 48 hours, I started getting texts and calls from cousins, aunts, my father's brother, even one of my mother's friends from church, all with some variation of the same message. Don't you think Derek deserves more consideration? He's the oldest. He has a family to think about. Your father must not have been thinking clearly. Aunt Patricia, my dad's sister, called me and said, and I quote, Madison, I have always been fond of you. But a house that size for a single woman, when Derek has children, it just doesn't seem right. I said, Aunt Patricia, my father made his wishes clear. But with the Parkinsons, he was of sound mind. His lawyer confirmed it. Gerald Whitmore, who knew him for 22 years, confirmed it. Well, Derek seems to think I know what Derek thinks, I said, and I got off the phone. Derek escalated. About 2 weeks after the reading, I received a letter from a law firm in Cleveland, not Gerald's firm, a different one, informing me that Derek was exploring his legal options regarding the validity of the most recent amendment to Frank Clark's will, with particular attention to the testamentary capacity of the decedent at the time of signing. He was trying to contest the will. He was using our father's illness as a weapon to undo our father's wishes. I sat in my kitchen in Columbus, my house, my dishes, my unwashed windows, and I read that letter, and I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been sad and soft and trying to be understanding went quiet, and something else came forward. I called Gerald Whitmore the next morning. Gerald was not surprised. This sometimes happens, he said in his measured, unhurried way, particularly in estates where one heir feels the distribution was unexpected. Can he win? I asked. Contesting a will in Ohio is a very high bar, Gerald said. He'd need to prove either that your father lacked testamentary capacity, which the documentation from 14 months ago would strongly refute, or that there was undue influence, which would mean proving that someone pressured your father into making these decisions. Someone meaning me. He would need to argue that yes. I took a breath. So he's going to claim I manipulated a dying man. That would be the likely avenue. I thought about all those weekend drives, all those nights on the air mattress in my parents' spare room, all those middle of the night bathroom runs and Jeopardy episodes and quiet afternoon conversations. What do I need to do? I asked. Gerald walked me through it. I had more documentation than I'd realized. Every medical appointment I'd driven my dad to. I had the calendar entries. The FMLA paperwork from work, showing my 6 weeks leave. The gas receipts. The text routine my dad and me. All saved on my old phone. The home care aide, who remembered me being there regularly. More than that, my father had been specific with Gerald. At the time of the will revision, 14 months before he passed, my father had submitted to a formal cognitive assessment. Standard practice in these situations, apparently, when there's a significant estate involved and family dynamics are complex. He had scored high. He had been documented as fully competent, and he had, Gerald told me, specifically mentioned Derek's likely reaction. He had told Gerald that he anticipated Derek would not accept the decision quietly. He had prepared accordingly. My father, the man who wrote things down instead of reacting right away, had seen this coming. He had protected me. I had to sit down when Gerald told me that. The next 3 months were a legal process that I don't need to take you through step by step, because most of it was paperwork and waiting and reading emails from lawyers that gave me headaches. But I will tell you this, Derek's challenge went nowhere. The cognitive assessment documentation alone made his testamentary capacity argument essentially impossible to advance. Gerald's firm was thorough. My documentation was solid. The home care aide gave a statement. Derek's lawyer, at some point, apparently advised him that continuing was not worth the cost. He dropped the challenge quietly without telling anyone in the family, which meant I found out it was over the same way I'd found out it had started, through a letter. I let out a breath I had been holding for 3 months. But the legal part, as draining as it was not actually the hardest part. The hardest part was my mother. My mother loved Derek. She still does. She always will. I don't hold that against her. He is her son. He is charming and capable, and when he wants to be warm, he can be very warm. I know what it feels like to love Derek, even when he's making you crazy. But the weeks and months after the will reading put her in an impossible position. Derek was angry and wounded and doing what he always did when he was those things. He turned up the charm, called her more often, made her feel special and seen, subtly positioned her against me without ever saying anything directly accusatory. I know this because my mother would say things like, "Derek just feels like you've pushed him out," and Derek wonders if maybe you could be more flexible about the house situation, and Derek says he just wants his children to have a connection to where they grew up. And I would respond as calmly as I could manage, "Mom, Dad made his wishes clear. I'm honoring them. I'm not pushing anyone out." There were weeks when my mother and I were strained. Cold. Not fighting exactly, but not fully present with each other either. I stayed in Columbus more. She called less. That was the loneliest stretch of the whole ordeal, honestly. Lonelier than the legal challenge. Lonelier than Derek's family pressure campaign. Because my mother and I had always had something real, even if it was complicated. And feeling that stretched thin because of Derek's manipulation was a particular kind of pain. The turning point came about 5 months after the reading. My mother called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because she was a Sunday caller. I knew something was off the moment I heard her voice. She said Derek and Brenda had come to visit that weekend. While there, Derek had gently, helpfully suggested that it might make more sense for my mother to move in with them in Cleveland. He had a big house. The kids would love having Grandma nearby, and it would free up the Columbus property to be sorted out properly. Sorted out properly. He had been working on her. My mother said, and I realized when he said that, I realized that I don't want to move to Cleveland. This is my home, my neighborhood, my church, my friends. She paused. And I realized he wasn't asking because he wanted me close. He was asking because of the house. I didn't say anything. Your father knew, she said quietly. He knew Derek. He knew all of us. He made his decision for good reasons. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that clearly. I cried. I am not ashamed of that. We talked for 2 hours that night. About my dad. About the years I'd driven up. About things she'd seen and hadn't fully acknowledged. About the summers when I was 15 and my art and the dinner where everyone laughed. I laughed, she said. I'm sorry I laughed. I know, Mom. He didn't deserve that much power over how we saw you. I know. We have been okay since then. Better than okay, actually. She comes to Columbus sometimes now, stays in what was her own house, and we sit in the kitchen my dad built and drink tea and talk. It is not a perfect relationship. There are still things unsaid, but it is real, and real was always what I wanted. It's been 18 months since the will reading. The house is mine. I moved in about 8 months ago. I've kept most of it the same. My dad's study is still mostly his. I can't quite bring myself to change it, but I painted the living room a color my dad always said he liked, a deep sage green, and I hung some of my art on the walls for the first time in my life. It felt right. Derek and I don't have a relationship right now. I want to be honest about that. We texted holidays. I sent his kids Christmas gifts. He didn't acknowledge them, but his daughter, she's 11, sent me a hand-drawn thank you card that I have on my refrigerator. Children are often so much more gracious than their parents. Maybe someday Derek and I will find our way back to something. My father's letter asked us to try. I haven't given up on that. Not entirely. But I also know that trying requires both people, and Derek has not shown up for his half of that yet. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. Either way, I'm not waiting in the hallway anymore. I got a promotion at work 3 months ago. I have a dog now, a rescue named Archie, who takes up most of my bed and ruins all my plans and is the best decision I've ever made. I have friends here, good ones. The kind you build slowly over years instead of collecting quickly. I am genuinely okay, more than okay. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that I think is actually the point of this whole story. If there is a point beyond just needing to get it out, my father never said any of this to me while he was alive. Not the full version, not you were never a freeloader, not you were the one who showed up. He was a man of notebooks, not speeches. He held things close. He showed love by doing things rather than saying them, and by the time he was dying, we were talking more than we ever had. But even then he couldn't quite say it. He said it in a letter. To a room full of people, with a lawyer reading it aloud, and maybe that's the most Frank Clark thing he could have done. I think sometimes about what it must have been like to sit with Gerald Whitmore 14 months before he died and decide all of this, to revise the will, to submit to the cognitive assessment, to write that letter, to anticipate Derek's reaction and prepare for it methodically, the way he always prepared for things. He was thinking of. While he was sick and tired and dying, he was thinking about how to protect me after he was gone. I never got to thank him for that. That's the part that still sits heavy. But I talk to him sometimes in the study, where his notebooks are still on the shelf. I don't know if I believe in whatever comes after this life. I'm not sure that matters. I just know that the room feels different when I say his name out loud in it. Less empty, I think. And if there's somewhere he is, I hope he knows. The house is good. The garden he planted is still growing. Mom is doing okay. Archie ate one of his old slippers, and I genuinely could not be mad. The sage green looks beautiful, Dad. I think you would have liked it. If you made it this far, and I mean really made it, not just the beginning and the end, but the whole thing, then you probably don't need me to explain why this story mattered to me. You already feel it. And if you've ever been the one in your family who was dismissed, misread, labeled the problem when you were actually the one quietly holding everything together, I want you to know something. Sometimes the people who love us most don't say it the way we need to hear it while there's time. And that is a tragedy. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But sometimes, not always, not even usually, but sometimes, they find a way to say it anyway. Before I go, I want to ask you honestly, have you ever had a sibling or family member who controlled how the whole family saw you? Someone who could walk into a room and rearrange everyone's opinion of you without saying a single obviously wrong thing? Because I think more people live this than talk about it. If you're comfortable, drop your story in the comments. I read them, all of them, slower than you'd think. And if this story hit somewhere real for you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Not for my numbers, not for the algorithm. Just because sometimes you hear something and think of a specific person, and that thought is worth following. Take care of yourselves. And take care of the quiet people in your lives. They're usually the ones who show up.